Hello. Today I want to talk about a short book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. In my country, Ukraine, this book was among the top sellers in all bookstores at the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And this is not surprising, because in terrible times, the question of the meaning of life becomes extremely acute. And one of the ways to find the meaning, as stated in the book we discuss, is to get acquainted with the experience of other people who have managed to find meaning. The authority of the man who survived the Nazi concentration camps and lost his entire family in those camps is beyond doubt when it comes to finding something worth living for. A few words about Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and philosopher of Jewish origin. He founded the Third Viennese School of Psychotherapy, or Logotherapy, as he calls it. It is called the Third Viennese School because it is actually the third, after the schools of psychotherapy of Freud and Adler in Vienna. We will talk more about logotherapy later in this video. Frankl was born in 1905 in Vienna. He began practicing psychiatry before the Holocaust. He studied medicine at the University of Vienna, specializing in psychiatry and neurology. His areas of expertise were depression and suicide. Later he worked in the studied fields. The question of the meaning of life had become central to Frankl's working methods even before his experience in concentration camps. He was deported to a concentration camp in 1942 and was held in several different camps until 1945, including Auschwitz and one of the auxiliary camps of Dachau. His parents were killed in Auschwitz and his wife was killed in Bergen-Belsen. Frankl learned that they were no longer alive after his release. After the war, Frankl was a head of a psychiatric clinic in Vienna. Frankl's book about his own experience in the concentration camp was first published in 1946 in German and was called Ein Psychologe erlebt das Konzentrationslager, which can be translated as the experience of a psychologist in a concentration camp. Subsequent editions also contained Trotzdem Ja zu Leben sagen, Say Yes to Life Anyway. The first edition in English was titled From Death Camp to Existentialism. Later, the title Man's Search for Meaning became the standard English title. The book was published many times. The edition that I read consists of 2 parts and a postscriptic note from 1984. The first part is Frankl's own experience in concentration camps, published in 1964. The second is Logotherapy in a Nutshell, which began to appear in English editions of this book in 1962. If you happen to be reading or have read a German edition rather than an English one, the second part is not there, at least in the editions that I have found. Instead, there is a play by Frankl called Synchronization in Birkenwald. In this play, Socrates, Kant, and Spinoza come down from heaven to help people in a fictional concentration camp. But in order to do this, people have to find the meaning of life themselves. According to the author, he planned to publish the book anonymously, so that readers would not take his authority in psychiatry into account. But later he decided that the book would not have a strong effect anonymously, because then people might doubt whether the book was really written by a concentration camp survivor. Now, let's get more into detail about each of the parts. The first is a documentary description of what happened in the concentration camp from the inside. Frankl doesn't describe in detail how the Nazis exterminated the Jews, but rather how the concentration camp's prisoners lived and what they felt. In the first part, there are attempts to interpret the experience from the point of view of psychotherapy and to show what helped people survive in the camp. And for some, not just to survive, but to survive without losing their human dignity, or even to face an inevitable, unjust, and suffering death without losing their dignity. Frankl writes, "We, who have come back by the aid of many lucky chances or miracles, whatever one may choose to call them, we know, the best of us did not return." At the same time, Frankl insists that we should not condemn those who lost their dignity in the camps, because people were in incredibly horrible conditions, where the chances of survival under the best of circumstances were 1 in 20. If we try to answer ourselves honestly what we would have done in those conditions, many of us would probably be ashamed to say it out loud. Almost all the prisoners, except for the few whom Frankl calls saints without exaggeration, cared about two things in those conditions: how to survive themselves and how to help their friends survive. And for this, they did everything possible. Frankl also describes people who, in those inhuman conditions, lost meaning in their lives and stopped fighting for survival. This was immediately noticeable to everyone else. And when a person lost meaning like that, it meant that they would die within 2 days. Because the body stops fighting when the psyche stops fighting. There were also people who died if their expectations of liberation were not fulfilled. When the anti-Hitler troops were already nearby and people were waiting for them to be liberated. For example, if for some reason they sincerely believed that they would be liberated at the end of December, they lost hope and died after the expected date. But those people who had meaning in life held on against all odds, through times of uncertainty and almost absolute likelihood of death. Because those who were weak and unable to work, and all concentration camp prisoners eventually became so, they were sent to the gas chambers. However, those who had meaning in life had at least some chance of surviving, or of knowing when they were one step from death that their lives and their suffering were not in vain. Speaking of suffering, since the concentration camps are the culmination of suffering, the book devotes a lot of space to the understanding of suffering. I will read one quote in this regard. But there is also purpose in that life which is almost barren of both creation and enjoyment, and which admits of but one possibility of high moral behavior, namely in man's attitude to his existence, an existence restricted by external forces. A creative life and a life of enjoyment are bent to him. But not only creativeness and enjoyment are meaningful. If there is a meaning in life at all, then there must be a meaning in suffering. Suffering is an ineradicable part of life, even as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. Frankl believes that by finding meaning, even by finding meaning in suffering, a person can live in inhuman conditions. As for the conditions, Frankl himself and other doctors who became prisoners of the concentration camps understood that medical textbooks lie about the limits to which the human body can go and how long it can live without sleep, food and water while working hard around the clock. In the first part, Frankl explores, analyzes and classifies the different states of mind of the prisoners with the cold precision of a psychotherapist. From his observations, Frankl draws conclusions about what helped to survive and what helped to remain human. He also gives many personal examples or examples of other prisoners. The book also contains many philosophical reflections, for example, about the certainty of being. Frankl writes that the past is the most certain existence, because it existed, it is fixed and cannot be changed, so it is more real than the present and the future. Keeping this in mind every time a choice is made, a person will not regret the missed opportunities of the past, but will know that they have used the past in its entirety. In general, I would like to quote every sentence from the first part, word for word, without exaggeration. There is literally nothing unnecessary in it. And what I have said so far is just a small fraction of what the book contains. The second part is a brief introduction to logotherapy, a psychotherapeutic method developed by Viktor Frankl. The basis of this method is treatment through finding and realizing the meaning of life. That is why it is called logotherapy. The word logos can be translated from ancient Greek in many different ways. It has dozens of meanings. One of the meanings is known to us from the New Testament, from the first line of the Gospel of John. En arche en ho logos. In the beginning was the Word. In this case, the established translation of the word logos is word. Frankl, on the other hand, takes a different meaning, namely logos as meaning. That is why the name of his method is logotherapy. Logotherapists consider their method to be free of dogma compared to, say, psychoanalysis. However, some dogmas are still present there. For example, the dogma that the search for and realization of the meaning of life cures neurosis caused by existential frustration, that is, the lack of understanding of why a person exists, which results in apathy and nihilism. By nihilism, Frankl means the denial of the existence of meaning in anything. The second important dogma is that meaning must be sought outside of one's inner world, and therefore in the world outside. According to Frankl, the very act of going beyond the boundaries of oneself can be therapeutic. The meaning of each life is different. Trying to say what the absolute meaning of life is, according to Frankl, is like trying to answer the questions of what is the best move in chess. Both in chess and in life, everything depends on an endless series of circumstances, so everyone has their own meaning, and you need to find it yourself, although perhaps with the help of a psychotherapist who, like Socrates, will help you with their questions. In addition, it is necessary to find the true meaning, because a person can cling to false ones. Frankl cites fanaticism as an example of this. Logotherapy itself can also help with neurotic symptoms, and even more so with what Frankl calls simply human problems. That is, with what people used to turn to a pastor, priest, or rabbi for help with. That is, the search for meaning. And although meaning is different for everyone, Frankl classifies us into 3 categories. Meaning in creativity, that is living to create something. Meaning in experiencing something or encountering someone, which can be something abstract, such as beauty, truth, culture, or something very concrete, such as knowing another person through love. And finally, finding meaning in suffering, if and only if the suffering is inevitable. At the same time, these categories can be mixed. Thus, in the concentration camps, people could combine the third category with the first or second. The third dogma of logotherapy is that the main motivational force of a person is the will to meaning, as opposed to the will to pleasure or will to power, on which respectively Freudian and Adlerian psychotherapies are based. In general, this second part of the book also contains nothing unnecessary. Everything is concise. Each paragraph leads to reflections on meaning, time, being, free will, the limitations of our time in this world, and much more. In this second part, Frankl outlines the main points of logotherapy, its methods of finding the meaning of one's life, and methods of dealing with fear and fixations. I will give an example of one of the proposed exercises of discovering the meaning of life. To do this, you need to imagine yourself in old age before you die, and look back at your life from that position. And think about what happened in your life so that you could say that it was not in vain. In the postscript, Frankl tries to answer the question of how to remain optimistic, or rather say yes to life, despite the existence of pain, guilt, and death, and criticizes the concept of the pursuit of happiness instead of living a life of meaning. The whole book is small. The edition I read is only 160 pages, but it is very rich and thought-provoking, and it is also imbued with a great love of life and passion for life. This is from a person who spent 3 years in concentration camps, dried out like a skeleton, without sleep, without food, who lost his family and loved ones, who didn't know every day whether he would be sent to the gas chamber or not. So I think we have a lot to learn from Viktor Frankl in terms of the ability to love life and fill it with meaning. I hope that you found this video useful and that the book piqued your interest. If so, please leave a comment. Have you read the book, or are you just about to? Which books you would like to see reviewed here on this channel? Please like and subscribe to the channel. It will motivate me to make new episodes. See you soon. Bye.